Willkommen.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan, and thank you, the American University of Armenia, for the opportunity to be here with you and share a little bit of my work, also to know more about what you're doing, and maybe in the future we could also think about ways of cooperation. I know maybe a short introduction will be difficult, but later on I'd like to know from where are you from, what are your research interests, and so on.
By the way, very quickly, sorry to interrupt. Sada Petrosyan was co-teaching the course where you did, we did this project where you became one of the case studies for the ecosystem services in urban areas.
Yeah.
So we did it around that time.
Okay, so we'd also opportunity to maybe know more about what you're doing, and hopefully in the future be able to do something together. As Alan said, my area, I started as an engineer, and then I moved like more social science over time. And I got my PhD in urban planning, but I work more with local governments, and they end up in management school. I mean, interface between urban planning, environmental policy, and management. Because where I am, I have to teach management, both public management and also some of the management theory, And here I try to show a little bit of what I did in this project. It was a 4-year project, what's called Belmont Forum. That's to explain to you what's a network of funding organizations that fund like transdisciplinary research, and also it is a project that works very closely with the main, I would say, users of the knowledge that you produce. What's very interesting is a 4-year project, and it got a lot of material. If you're interested, I can share the publication, put some links here as well, and they will leave the presentation with you. And you can also know more details. I can also give you more information about it. Just very quickly, I work for the FGV. FGV is interesting because I think we are the only organization of this kind that I know, that we are both think tank. You start as a think tank, but also we offer degrees in social science, management, public management, business management, and economics. We also ranked now as the third think tank in the world and the best managed. And then this started in the 1940s, and our research, even the students there were pretty much focused on connect the students with practice. We're very focused on practice-oriented research, and 2/3 of our staff is just dedicated to applied research, and this project fits very well in the work that FGV, Fundação Getulio Vargas, Foundation Getulio Vargas, is a kind of dictator of Brazil. Dictator, no, he also later was elected, he was dictator. And it is interesting story because he killed himself while he was in power. I think it's the only case in the world. He shot himself while he was in power as president. And you go to Rio, you can visit him, he wants a bullet in his pajama, But it's an interesting character. And he created this institution, but you are independent. You are private, independent, non-profit organization. You work very closely with governments. Okay. See now, see we can change. Good. Well, now talk more about the research. What's the problem? Where it started? You had this work you're doing looking at food, water, energy in cities, particularly because there's going to be a growing number of people living in cities, particularly in less urbanized countries. Also, there is these estimations that the amount of energy, food, or water will grow rapidly in the next few years, and also there are a lot of risks you see from time to time of security issues related to the water or energy or food, depending where you are. And also you're interested in city because cities are interesting because they consume most of the food, water, energy, but they produce very small part of this, most of the countries. So all of this is imported from elsewhere, you know, sometimes from other countries. And the start point for research was exactly this, you know, saw the cities consume a lot of these three resources, but they don't produce much. And also, I saw that they have little leverage on these systems, you know, the local governments particularly, they control very little on these three aspects, as much by other levels of government or private sector. And you also see that if you look at the consumption perspective, for example, climate change emissions, this is a large part of the emission coming from these three components. It means cities sometimes they rank very low in inventory because the production side, IPCC way, but if you look at consumption side, could increase sometimes 5 times more than the production, because a lot of these comes from outside and generate emissions elsewhere. And then you look at both the also supply side and demand side. You also can manage supply for the demand. In cities, they have a lot of leverage, maybe not for the production of electricity, but for example, regulation of buildings, of energy efficiency that can also affect the supply. And then we look at the whole life cycle. And particularly we're interested in understanding the role of green and blue infrastructure, how can improve this food, water, energy nexus, not call the connections with these three components. And green infrastructure for us, I'm going to give you a definition, basically is natural components. Sometimes we call green infrastructure methoism, but we don't consider it's considered a natural component. And the research, particularly our role, we're in the management part, was going to show you interdisciplinary. You're more interested to understand how cities innovate. Innovation for us do new things that cities were not doing, how they build the capabilities to innovate, to better govern these three components using green and blue infrastructure. This is a kind of specific focus of our research. And this was done through one thing for this build this consortium of 7 institutions funded by 6 organizations, also with support of the cities themselves. And they were part, and other organizations with support. Was a big network, around 50 people in this consortium. I was the consortium leader, and we had 1 PI in each of these organizations, but in total around 50 people working in these. So you can have, like, I will leave the link if you want more information. It's a lot of information in this link. And it was funded at this consortium called Belmont Forum. I think Armenia is not part of the European Union is or others, but basically is 42 of these organizations. And what they do, they open joint calls for research on global change. They just work global change, health, environment, and for example, biodiversity, other things they are interested in. And this was part of the order call with they funded 15 projects. Our project is one of these projects. And the idea is exactly this called transdisciplinary approach, different for poor, like more scientific academic research where we generate a lot of papers or apply research that we don't generate any paper, just do the kind of interaction. You have like this idea that you have the knowledge generation done through the academic publications, evidence-based research to kind of legitimize and review the knowledge, but also the leading cities, the 10 cities that show, I think 10 cities who work very closely, they also help to build the knowledge with their own experience and also help us to review the knowledge you generate. And then you see in the end, you have this guidebook I showed you. It's free to download now. It was launched in December last year. That exactly was a joint co-production called Knowledge with the cities. And the objectives of the research is really broad objectives: understand how this innovation happened, this food, water, energy nexus using green and blue infrastructure, to create a framework to explain on how cities develop institutions, innovate, and gain the capabilities that if you want to, later on, I can give you more details. Capabilities are different for innovation. Some have the innovation, new things done, but capabilities is how organization capable to do that. That is a different aspects of this framework. And finally, you develop this guidebook that now is being disseminated to other cities that want use to apply this knowledge. And we're like 12 working package. You see each organization on the consortium responsible for one, but the others also cooperate. Basically, was these. And first now the first objective, understand innovation. How we did it when we started, we saw these components, not much knowledge around it, and not much understanding how the cities gain the capability to innovate and be able to better govern these three components using green-blue infrastructure. And our definition is internet connected network of wide range of living landscapes element, the green-blue infrastructure. You divide it in 6 kinds. The literature is very confusing. There are different naming for the same thing, but they're trying to streamline the 6 kinds and try to identify the links of these 6 elements with here, the 6 kinds of green-blue infrastructure with food, energy, and water. And there was also a first effort in the beginning to see what literature exists. And then you compile more than 400 papers that talk about this food, water, energy, and with one of these components, you try to get a little bit of knowledge of this, how it works.
Sorry, the urban rivers fall into wetlands, urban wetland.
Urban
rivers fall into urban wetlands.
Yeah. It's all thing that's blue is there. And also, if you coastal city, it could be open wetland and okay. And also we develop this methodology to assess these impacts of each of these 6 elements of green-blue infrastructure on food, water, energy. And you did this particularly, for example, the case of São José dos Campos and Johannesburg in São Paulo, São José dos Campos in Brazil. You look at, for example, if you expand the amount of green roofs in the city, like double it, or certain area of green roofs, how much is going to be the impact on food, water, energy, production, and also consumption, because you have to decide to produce food, but maybe you need to use more water and also more energy. And this is the first you try to understand these links, more the physical links between these 3 elements. This was done by our partner in Yale University that was more geographers and people who look like GIS and do a lot of this work on with these physical flows. It's called urban metabolism, and also you try to relate these to a more landscape architecture. Or our partner in Taipei look at the impact of this green infrastructure on these 3 elements through other kinds of scale, looking more like neighborhood scale. And for example, they saw that areas that were more green infrastructure, the temperature much lower, exactly because you have the component of cooling, particularly when you have heat waves, and there is a very hot country. Also, people use less energy in the neighborhoods of these. And this was another part of it. Also, you did a kind of literature review of use of green-blue infrastructure and kind of innovations they do in particularly what's called Global South, from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I show you that this was more academic research we did. We've looked at academic papers, and it's very biased towards China. China for half of the papers about China. And then we have to do a little bit of work on separate China from the others. But what we saw, there is a lot of research in Asia, but Africa, you just found 4 papers on Africa, very little. And then when you do only the academic bibliometric analysis, you miss a lot of the rest of the work of this innovation. And then you find out when you do the practice, there are a lot of innovations in Africa. They are not reported academically, exactly. Sometimes they don't have the institutions to do that. And you did then the academic survey, and also did like a survey in what called gray literature, like looking at particularly the ICLEI, but the data ICLEI, one of our partners is called Local Governments for Sustainability. Is a network of around 3,000 cities that they work with different aspects of sustainability with cities, and you use it. You try to map the innovations in green and blue infrastructure in this database in these three continents, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Found 82 cities that kind of do interesting work in terms of innovation, and you identify the type of innovation and try to why they were created. You're doing this using secondary data, internet, that time in COVID, but also some Zoom interaction with some of the officials from these cities. Understand these kind of institutional arrangements that generate this innovation. What kind of collaboration? Sometimes in the cities, they don't have the R&D capacity or the patent for doing it. A lot of innovation comes from this collaboration, private sector, NGOs, civil society, users, and so on. And for example, we did a lot of work, analyze this, and look at why the cities, they engage in this green and blue infrastructure innovation. A lot of these, for example, is very different from the continent. In Africa, a lot of the green and blue infrastructure related to food production, particularly urban agriculture. We see a lot of these because Africa is an important component for having this security, food security, urban agriculture. While, for example, in Latin America and Asia, is much more regulation in recreation, water for protection of reservoir of water and so on. And different in these 82 cities are different use of it. And finally, you got these 10 cities that you look at in specific case studies and interact a lot with the official of these cities to try to understand better what called the process of innovation. We map first how are the linked district, the green infrastructure, food, water, energy, and you identify innovations in the literature, academic literature, also identify innovations happen in the practice, and then you decide about these 10 cases, what cases we found interesting innovations, but also had close access to the cities. Remember that time was COVID, some cities were not exactly functioning properly. And then the cases were very different, and just show you quickly and show the results, Florianópolis. And you wrote a lot about this case. You have a database of the cases. If you're interested in understanding the case, you have a link to all the cases. But for example, Florianópolis in Brazil was more linking community gardens to composting initiative. And you have also internamerizo.
We're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll talk. Yeah. And just quickly, the case, another one, the Doma was a kind of eco city that in the end didn't work as we planned. And again, caught in India, they have this machine with support of the Rockefeller Foundation that help the market to compost a lot of the waste that come from the market and use these back into agriculture. A lot of these, like particularly in Africa, they have this school greening project that they work with the students in learning how to actually develop greening projects, could be urban agriculture, but could be planting forests and so on. And also some of these very low-income communities that could get jobs later on, in gardeners and so on. And we have different components. You have one in the lake that was the case of China Kunming. I could not put here because of change, but it somehow the same, but was a lake that ecosystems payment for ecosystem service in the lake, in Dian Lake in Kunming, is a big lake next to the city that they tried to. This case, for example, in Nagpur, India, was very interesting, is a wastewater treatment plant for reuse in the energy sector. They basically were treating they needed water power plant, and then they make an agreement with the city to treat the waste water and use this wastewater in the plant. And after that, the water was used in the agriculture. Back then, they clean the water their own because they need the water for cooling. And then a lot of these kind of circular economy, trying to build the circular economy component. So on, if you want to have all the details of the cases, you can go And the second part, it was really kind of map of what's happening and what kind of innovation, and try to understand, explain how cities innovate, how they do, and as part that more closely engaged, more public management part. The first component we saw, actually, the cities, they learn this from somewhere. They have this learning mechanism. The city, also cities like local governments, they learn in all components. They were not doing suddenly, they start doing because they learn or internally or externally. So two learning, different kinds of learning mechanisms, some external, some external organization, not external from the country, not external from the bureaucracy of the city, could be civil society people, company. In this case, just Mindful as a company that approached the city for the water. And also have internal collaboration between departments of city or training or learning by experimentation. The city somehow innovate, has some capacity to have a problem and have to innovate locally, internally. They do it. It was very interesting that you map that you remember 82 cities. You look at these different learning mechanisms, to map this learning mechanism. And what you saw, there is a large dependence of these external sources for these innovations, and you try to understand better the impact of these learning mechanisms, particularly external sources. So the external sources are very important, and it for different kinds of sources. For example, in Africa, a lot of innovations with organizations from other countries, particularly international development, for example. While in Asia, so much more component of the civil society organizations and interaction with these other sources. And they'll map this knowledge, try to then see the dynamics of the knowledge. And you look at how this knowledge comes through these organizations, and they generally acquire, and the effect of this knowledge. And in general, they acquire this knowledge, build the capability, translate this into I would say the administrative routines of the city, the bureaucracy, and then they implement this sometimes with partnership of other organizations and so on. And you saw the external learning mechanisms. The impact is you divide the innovation into two kinds: more transformative. Transformative is something that the city was not doing anything about that sector. For example, they're doing no composting, they started doing compost. And then you have incremental innovation that, for example, is already doing compost, but it's just a small scale, but expand for the rest of the city. And you saw these two kinds of learning mechanisms and two kinds of impacts. And so the external learning mechanisms is much more powerful in terms of generating more transformative innovation, while the internal learning mechanisms are important for this more incremental innovation. They kind of make some change or some budget change for the department can expand the initiative that exists. It's all important of these.
Which of this was the most challenging? Which of this was most challenging according to the study? Which was the most challenging?
Yeah, these are kind of specific cases, and the more challenging is the more transformative innovation. That they do something that's really new to the city we're not doing, and they have to establish the whole process of doing this new, to create the capability. They don't have anyone doing that particular activities. And for example, one was payment for ecosystem service in this city in China. Never done this, try to do it, and they got a lot of this knowledge from outside. They actually from other countries. They visit, and even from these organizations, they help them to give some of this knowledge to establish their own program. Then they saw that more challenging in general have external source of knowledge.
Just a comment. I think you go back. I think transformative is what everyone expects change to be. But everyone discounts the importance of incremental change also, was very important. And
many of these innovations, they have a kind of transformative, some have the two more transformative component, and you can later on after a few years, they expanded. Took a few years to do more the incremental. But a lot of innovations was something very small scale they could expand. They're already doing it. Just our definition and a little bit the definition of literature, in management. And you look at specific aspects now, we're still working on this, but in this one was the role of what called transnational municipal networks like ICLE or C40. They have for climate change. There are this network of cities, and see the role of them to build the capabilities in the city for this what called collaborative governance regimes. And a lot of this is collaboration, local collaboration, but they have this external component. And here, for example, the case of Gangtok, I mentioned to this machine funded by Rockefeller Foundation, help actually the external component help these local actors to work together. They will not work together, but because Rockefeller Foundation funded the machine, they brought some knowledge, experts in this kind of use of the machine in markets, and help, like for the market association, the city government, and also the people who are going to use the compost to work together. They are not working together. They will look at specific aspects of collaborative regime. In the case of Florianopolis, was very interesting. It was a case where they had a health problem with rats in certain neighborhood where there was no waste collection because they're very narrow roads. And the local clinic, the public clinic, the doctor approached the city. He worked for the city also. He approached the waste management company to find a solution. What it was difficult to do all the collection, and they suggested do a composting process, and most because 80% of the waste of waste would be compost organic waste, and they started doing these at a local clinic where this doctor was, particularly with medicinal plants or other things that they could use the waste. And with this, they could stop the problem with rats, and they started doing more in these neighborhoods. And they also linked to the schools, local schools, public schools started doing this. Today in the city, there are like 400 of this composting and also garden initiative. They get the compost, locally decomposed, and with this, you could also reduce the amount of waste collected from, and you look at how this was possible, and you look at the aspect of leadership, because so components are no more in the management part, and you saw different kinds of leadership is needed depending on the stage of the project. And then, for example, when you establish something, was this doctor who call more transformative leadership, this kind of leadership, you person who connects with the other. Sometimes people are good to connect to the other. But later on, to expansion of the program was the people in the waste management company. They call more transaction leadership. They help to actually operationalize the initiative in a way that you can expand, do more like operational part. And finally, when things established, you need this more transformative leadership to avoid the thing die out. A lot of businesses start, remember later on they died because most of the people leave the organizations and so on, and this transformative leadership find a way to connect and make it more permanent. In this case, was a leader for this initial place where they started composting. He became city council, and he passed a law in the city that established this initiative, which this could get permanent budget for the city for this initiative. And it's kind of, you look at how this considered a kind of radical innovation, exactly because they didn't have any compost in the city. It was a period of 10 years, and now they compost around 30% of the waste they generate. In very local, they don't even need to go and collect the waste because the islands along.
And the city provides technical assistance to the
Yeah, exactly. The only thing the city provides is to establish the initiative. They help you sometimes with the land, make agreement with, many times the land belongs to the city, and the city make agreement with the local association of people who live there to use that land. And later on also, the composting part is very complex. It's not something you just put it there, but even you can generate pests, rats and cucarachs, and you have to actually work with someone to teach you how to do the compost and use the compost. And also the city, when you visit there, they go every other week to each of these 400. They have like staff to do this from the waste management company, and they check whether they actually be operationalized. To sometimes all voluntary, particularly COVID, people were at home and are not doing the compost, and they can abandon few of the sites and have to contact the person. And they did a lot of this technical system, but pretty much is run by the people locally. You call co-production, it's pretty much co-produced by the local organization. So this is the case, for example, and you try to understand these different aspects of the innovation. The other parts you collaborate, but you are not, for example, the initial calculations of estimation of the food, water, energy impacts. This was Yale University. You help with some knowledge, which pretty much done by them. It's they have expertise on that, using GIS mapping and this to estimate the things you help with. And you work more with this part of the management, how this knowledge are built, the exchange, and so on. And finally, the third component is the guidelines. You got all this knowledge. And the idea behind these, you have a lot of these innovations, the situation A before and situation B now. You move from A to B, and some intervention program strategy or something needed. But there are other factors that are important to make it happen, particularly this green and blue infrastructure. What exactly? Try to give an idea, research to understand how this innovation, food, water, energy nexus happen, and how to make it happen. The idea is now, okay, someone who has not done this, how they do it, and you got all the material they produce. This was towards the last year, particularly last year of the product, also last year, 2022, and you have all this material produced, also with knowledge from the other projects, and they developed this guide in the middle. You can download is a practical guide for city how to innovate in green blue infrastructure for these three components, and it would disseminate this knowledge. It was launched during the World Urban Forum last year, and we have like we had like a kind of ICLEI did this training workshop with 50 cities interested in the topic. And there are a few cities that actually are now using this guidebook that we developed. And that's it. The message is there are all these components that make interference in these systems and can be pose a threat to food, water, energy system. And since you see the COVID, what happened? A lot of cities run out of food or supply chains disturbed. Some cities run out of water. And so what? There's so many components of this, because a lot of times the cities, they don't have any leverage on these components. And you see how to improve the leverage using green and blue infrastructure. And so in all these initiatives, the cities, they collaborate. The innovation have went through collaboration. None of the 82 cases a city alone did it. All have someone else working together, need to use other components, other stakeholders, and also they can bring a lot from this co-production. So the co-production is a very important component, particularly these three components where the city has little leverage on actually managing them, and they have to be working together with the citizens. They can increase this leverage, particularly in the use of these three components, not in generation much, but mostly in the use. And a lot of local governments, a lot of space to harness this potential in green blue infrastructure through learning. The city learning, the levels of learning were very important for the city in doing other things. So several of the cities that have, I'm not sure here in Armenia, but probably there is a city that's more innovative. in Brazil is Curitiba. Now, City Innovation, Curitiba do a lot of things. And see, they actually build a lot of this capability. I have a lot of research on transportation side, and look at different cities in Brazil. Curitiba, when you measure the innovation, they're doing very good job on that. And you saw that these different learning mechanisms, they have different impacts on the capabilities of the city, the kind of innovation they do. And this thing is to try to understand better. You start the first with, the step of things you saw, the impact, the transformational and more incremental innovation. But now we're trying to understand each of these learning mechanisms and the impact they have on the cities. And that's pretty much that. I have published around 20 papers and book. And if you're interested in the guidebook, I'd be interested to share with you. And that's it. And finally, if you're interested, we're kind of on our initiative. We have a call for papers for climate change city in developed countries. Maybe some of you will work with. The problem, the deadline is very soon, 15, but it's just the abstract. If you have some research going on, you can please look at the journal is called Urban Climate. And you plan to launch this work during the World Forum that will be in Egypt next year. And also we organize a workshop that will cover some of the travel in Egypt around May this year. That's it. Thank you. I kind of go very quickly through the project, but if you want specific question, I have more material. I could not use my computer Apple, but I tried to explain to you any of these components. So there was a